Okay, if you don't know who I am, I'm Suzanne Tidkemeyer. I used to write a column called No Longer Quivering for Pathos about the Evangelical Quiverful movement. I wrote about all the foilables, and follies of everybody in Quiverful. Just some really silly stuff. So here we go. We're going to talk about some more silly stuff today. I'm doing a review of Debbie Pearl's create a better brain through neuroplasticity. This is part number 5. I'm hoping I can finish up next week. Who knows at this rate, because this book is a hot mess. Don't bully Debbie or anybody I talk about today. And at the end, I'm probably going to talk a little bit about the situation with Steve McCrae and Katie Joy Paulson. It has not a damn thing to do with Quiverful, except for the fact that Katie Joy Paulson has taken my life story to use as her own a couple times and has plagiarized some of my things from No Longer Quivering, which makes me very annoyed. But I'm not going to talk about that yet. I'm going to talk about the review, and then afterwards I will go back and revisit that stuff and talk a little bit about what Costa Rica is like when we're having the kind of extreme weather we had yesterday. Oh my goodness, we had we had a heck of a time getting to and from Liberia. I got to talk about that a bit because it's something. If you're thinking about moving to Costa Rica, you need to think about it, if you can tolerate it or not. Okay, so when we left off last time with Debbie Pearl, she was talking about her childhood and pork and beans and how her little brother, would eat anything under the sun and would just eat up all the food. So to stop him from doing that, her mother came up with the idea of putting a couple of cans of pork and beans in a unheated in a pretty serving bowl. And her mother convinced her brother that pork and beans are the best thing on the planet, especially cold. So she said the little guzzler would eat the beans, so now there was food left for our visitor. Debbie's talking about a girlfriend of hers that would come visit her that was in a very bad situation with her parents and was skinny and not right. Now, I have to talk more about this because this is not a really healthy meal that what Debbie is talking about here. She's not talking about them eating greens or boiled eggs and avocados like she's trying to now with her building a better brain through neuroplasticity claims of gut health and gut brains. It does sound rural and southern. Growing boys eat huge amounts of food. I went over all this last time. They need all those extra calories to grow. They have to take in a lot more calories than a girl. It's just the way it is, or an adult, sadly enough. I wish I could eat more than I do, which I eat a silly small amount and still don't lose weight. Okay. So the boy eating all that food was in a household with food insecurity of not enough to go around. So they would have to add expensive food into the mix so that it wouldn't be a situation where he was starving. Now here's the crazy part to me, and I'm reading back to this because I want to highlight this part, and I'm going to expand on it. I didn't do that last time. Debbie went on to explain that her mother laughed at her dad shouting and hollering, and that the shouting and the hollering and her mother laughing at it and the pork and bean situation made her house merry and jolly. Okay, I don't care how merry and jolly you try to pretend something is. If there's a man shouting and hollering all the time, there's abuse going on. That's abusive to talk to other people that way on a regular basis. Um, she was trying to claim that because her best friend started eating and started getting into eating competitions with her pesky little brother over who could eat the most meat and mashed potatoes, that the girl's depression flew away. Literally, that is not how you heal depression and anxiety. That's why I'm going back over this point, because That's not at all how anxiety and depression are dealt with. And this is something that I see commonly all the time in quiverful and evangelical households, where they make all kinds of claims about depression and anxiety, not trusting Jesus, all sorts of things that it is not, instead of what it is, usually, which is some sort of brain chemistry balance off, or maybe dealing with really tough circumstances. So it's not any Zen atmosphere emanating from Debbie's verbally abused mother, regardless of what she's saying. Her friend probably gained some weight because she was eating cheap carbs served at Debbie's house instead of whatever it was she was eating at her home of origin, which we don't know. But it is the South, so I'm sure there was fried foods galore. And then we were treated to some rantings, and here we pick up where we left off last week on the healing powers of eating a cup of sauerkraut today. Oh my goodness. I don't even know where to start with this except to say she gives no thought to how much extra sodium, a rather unhealthy amount, that this adds. And it would be way over the amount is necessary for a day. We need salt in our diets. We don't need massive amounts of salt. And every type of cheap ass carbohydrate, cheap food, processed food is just loaded with the stuff. I can't eat processed food anymore because when I do, all I can taste is the salt, not the food, and I don't like eating that much salt. So Debbie starts to try to double down on only eating the pickled and fermented food movement, which pickled and fermented foods, they have their place in moderate amounts. And the seemingly less than stable Jillian Epperly of Jillian Juice promoted something very similar that has ended up with a few of the people that were following her. They're dead. There's been lawsuits and all sorts of things going on there. So I would not recommend eating salted, rotted cabbage water at all, ever. A Debbie quote, a stupid one. You will become sensitive to mold, chemicals, and other environmental infractions. You will become one of the afflicted. She's talking here about what she considers someone that has a damaged gut, who is lining up to get a fecal transplant. Fecal transplants are a thing. I don't quite know why. They say it's good. They say in some circumstances it's good. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. She talks about how disgusting it is while scolding the parents of autistic children to go this route to help. She floats a few lies about how you have to be practically dead from modern medicine for a fecal transplant to help at all. It is a procedure that has its place, like I said, but Debbie doesn't have a real clue what that is. And I give you Debbie's other own quote from this chapter that I'm just like head desking over. Capital letters. Repent! Repent! Okay, until you change your attitude and or lifestyle, no amount of cleaning your gut and eating good food will bring healing. Literally not true. Literally not true at all. She's saying that nothing you do matters for your gut health, your brain health, or anything until you just accept Jesus. Tenderly, softly accept Jesus. Accept that the version of Jesus that they follow is just head desk. It's just somebody who's very abusive. And let me warn you, this isn't going to get any better as we move into whatever Debbie thinks causes autism, like vaccines and not parenting the right way. But boy, there's a lot of blaming, ahoy. You have to bear with me here. I don't have the largest amount of knowledge on autism. I don't have autistic children. I've done very little research on it, but I do know that vaccinations do not cause it, no matter what Debbie claims. I've seen all the research on that because that I have looked at. I've been curious about it, whether vaccines cause autism, like Jenny McCarthy was trying to claim that they did. No, they do not. At least science shows that it doesn't. Like so many conditions, I have a feeling that once science decides it has the answer, it'll be a laundry list of factors, none of which are bad parenting or eating the wrong thing or vaccines. Debbie starts with the claim that autism diagnosis has jumped in just a few years, the early 2000s. But she immediately discounts the fact that so many more people are becoming educated to the symptoms, word is spreading, and more people are diagnosed that might have been misdiagnosed back in her day with something else. She calls it a biblical plague at one point. She mentions puzzles. Oh, like other long-term conditions, it is a puzzle. And I'm familiar with this because I've, myself, when I started having my issues and got diagnosed with it, there wasn't as much known as there is today. I hate that people have long COVID, but because of long COVID, we're actually getting some research into some drugs for it. So I'm down with that. So Debbie claims that it started with gut health and the wrong diet before taking a hard left turn into her long story of having one of her children vaccinated, fighting all night over the baby with the spirit of death, even waking Mikey up to pray over the child, only to later find out that her neighbor, who also was vaccinated at the same time the child was vaccinated, had woken up to a dead baby. That story yet again. Debbie tells this one a lot. And that was the point where she turned against vaccinations altogether because she'd taken her baby to get a vaccination. And the same day as her neighbor, they went together. The neighbor's child died. Debbie's did not. And Debbie credits that to wrestling with the spirit of death all night. Yeah, so Debbie blames basic childhood vaccinations for autism. We're not even talking about the COVID vaccination, the RSV, or any of the newer ones. We're just talking about the ones that we've all gotten, that most of us, including her, likely have, because at one time vaccination rates were very high. She goes on to say that vaccinations were way safer when her kids were little, but they're now filled with bad stuff. Safer like the angel of death showing up to croak her kids safer? She doesn't explain. She cites a very old study as proof before launching into a transcription of a speech by Robert Kennedy, RFK Jr. on YouTube. If you're not familiar with RFK Jr., he is running for president right now under the Independent Party. Okay, so Debbie cites him as a legitimate source in her book. He's not a legitimate source. He is the apex of the anti-vaccination movement, even though he likes to say he's not. Robert goes on to claim quite falsely that you have a very low chance of dying, of having a chronic health condition before 1989, but childhood illnesses skyrocketed right then. I laughed when I read that because he proceeded to name a pile of conditions I've had. I've had many of them since birth in 1960. Back when it was just 3 vaccinations. Hell, I'm so old, I remember getting measles a year or two before the measles vaccination came out. And it wasn't any church picnic. And I was a little kid, I still remember this. Clearly, Kennedy is just reaching for blame. He cites no studies. He has no research. It's all just whining and fear mongering over vaccines. I've looked at his vaccination rates and his claims for death over the COVID vaccine, for example, and he looks at the studies wrong. Like he talks about the death 6 weeks after the vaccination rates, not realizing, not citing the spike in COVID infections that led to the spike in deaths, not the vaccination. That's just my hill to die on. I am pro-vax, just like Erin from UKC People Suck. Her and I are pro-vax, and I'm real curious to see what her thought is going to be on RF Kennedy, RFK Jr., who just infuriates me. My husband in there loves him. Ugh. So he has no real research that he's following. And when he does follow real research, he skews the results to say something that they don't say. Debbie loves to do that. This is all followed by Debbie completely reversing herself, saying that the Amish and the Mennonites eat organic and didn't vaccinate, yet they still turn out kids with autism at a much lower rate than those sinful Twinkie guzzling shot taking heathens. Debbie quote, interestingly enough, over 70% of people with autism also have gastrointestinal problems and issues related to their gut. Huh. And immediately after stating the above, Debbie takes this to the weirdest possible place that she could, blaming it all on cell phone usage by men warping their sperm with radiation. Dudes, don't rub your crotch with your iPhone, please. Even if it won't fry your sperm, don't do it. Don't do it. It's probably not a good idea. First, there's not much. It's not a small nuclear reactor. You're not housing Chernobyl near your junk. Let's just throw that out right now. It's a very different type of electromagnetic field that we're talking about here. Radio frequency radiation has not been conclusively linked to autism in any way, shape, or form. And before you know, we're back to Debbie claiming that autism destroys mirror neurons, which means that your child will not mimic your facial expressions. Debbie tells a tale of how her son, half in, half out of her lady parts while he was being birthed, weird story, smiling at his smiling daddy. Head desk. She completely ignores the piles of legitimate research that say smiling, mimicking takes time to develop. Smiles before 2 months of age are reflex smiles having to do with gas and various other things, with more in common with a leg jerk, a startle response, or gas than any mimicking of a damn thing. Then Debbie skews right back to cell phone blaming again, with Debbie ordering you to keep your cell phone off your junk and away from your kid, as well as turning off the Wi-Fi when the children are around. Oh, brother. I wonder how it went down in her house the other day when the federal government gave their little warning signal through cell phones, televisions, and radios the other day at 2:08 p.m. Where's it? 2:18. I got one here on my Skype phone. And everybody on various things was all that are, I'm just going to say it, they're Trump supporters and the MAGA heads that won't get vaccinated, were saying that it was to activate 5G and to turn us all into zombies. Okay, I don't know about you, but I have yet to develop a craving for brains. And I don't have 5G here. I would love to have 5G. But Debi just continues blaming all kinds of crazy stuff for autism. And just like that, we're on Debi's brain damage cures. And there's more fat shaming. Oh, goody, goody, goody. We come to the fictional story, at least I think it's fictional story, of Benny. That's my opinion. Whose mama was writing for Debi in the early 1990s. She wrote her for advice and wanted her advice. At the same time, Debi was claiming to have been fostering a brain-damaged baby named Peanut. Where's she getting these names? This is really the only quick mention of Peanut anywhere in the book or anywhere I could find online. Debi claims because Peanut had a tiny deformed skull, she was researching in the library how to heal Peanut, which led her to tell Benny's mom how to heal him. Debi said this of poor Benny. She wrote of being overrun with mice and rats because he dropped food all over the house and of his nasty diapers, which he continually dug in, smearing the contents all over the walls. Debi followed with descriptions of out-of-control destructive behaviors and high-pitched screaming. So bad that the neighbors were constantly calling the cops on this family. I think it's quite likely this is one of those fake Pearl stories, and they come up with them on the regular basis. Sure, while it's possible to have a child with autism to that degree, in my time working at a children's residential treatment center with some kids having pretty severe autism diagnosis on top of everything else, I never once saw anyone like this. It sounds like this was way more than autism, like perhaps some strain of what we used to call mental retardation or comorbidity going on, some type of intellectual disability. I'm not a big fan of institutionalizing children, but this sounds like one of those situations where to keep the child safe in a stable environment, it might have been better to put him in a professional setting, at least for a few hours a day, with those trained to deal with his issues and provide physical therapy and other treatments. Debi's solution? Sauerkraut. Sauerkraut, fiber, and organics. Her usual, the usual supplements for her. Her quote, "I knew I was her one escape from her world of torment. Someone who heard her crying in her wilderness. It was so sad." Doubly sad because this was clearly one of those situations where the right kind of professional help would have helped the family, would have benefited that family. Not advice on stuffing the kid full of sauerkraut. Debi's second piece of advice for this woman: get a dog. Well, there are oodles of good reasons to get a child a pet, not necessarily a dog even. Teaching compassion, teaching responsibility, love, so many different positives, including unconditional love, because that's what pets provide us with, is unconditional love. Even cats will do that. Birds too. Of course, Debi has to fat shame the dog too by noting it was an old fat dachshund. She then goes on to claim that Benny bonded so tightly he would flop the dog, and with eating sauerkraut that his brain started growing started pruning off all those bad connections, and he stopped screaming and acting out. Third way Debbie thinks that you can cure autism: exercise, and plenty of it. Benny's parents bought a trampoline upon her advice and said this: Benny and his family lived up north, so all their winter months were spent in the house. That would be enough to give me brain damage. Really, Debbie? Really? You know it snows in Tennessee sometimes, and it's hella cold, so I don't know why she thinks that she would have brain damage in a colder environment. That's ridiculous. Has Debbie generally never been north of the Mason-Dixon line? Even the snowiest climbs, there are tons of outdoor activities to do daily. During my years living in Germany, we went downhill skiing, cross-country skiing, ice skating, or we just took daily walks in the cold, snowy forests. Cold weather does not mean you huddle in the house in the dark. Sometimes there is nothing better than bundling up for a long tramp through the snowy countryside and coming back to a big mug of hot tea or cocoa afterwards. Trust me, I had a really close friend that I'm still very good friends with that we used to do that. We would take these long tramps through the woods and around the countryside. It didn't matter if it was fall, winter, whatever, and we'd come back. I'd lay my son down for a nap. Her German Shepherd would curl around one side, her Norwegian forest cat around the other side, and we would have hot tea. And I cannot tell you what that was like. It was like heaven. We just would do this every time we got together, and it was really good. So I'm not going to dispute the outside. I'm just going to throw some shade and say she's wrong about winter. Debbie keeps mentioning again and again and again how fat the dog Flop is. She's really singularly focused on the weight of even imaginary beings. Henry bounces around happily on his trampoline. Daddy cries because Benny is smiling. There's some nasty clothing malfunction that Debbie mentions that adds nothing to the story of how his autism got healed. Before she complains about how fat Benny's mother is, complaining that she never told Debbie what an unhealthy, plump little sausage she is, Debbie claims Benny is so much better because of all the vitamin D he's getting from the sunshine outside. Note to Debbie, you can get vitamin D in the winter too, and in the fall. And just like that, Debbie is claiming how many severely former autistic children she's seen cured with sunshine, sauerkraut, and doggos. She claims they're now college graduates, in the military, and one is a trial lawyer. Sure, Debbie, sure. She ends that chapter by randomly throwing in that you must play music like hymns and that the Bible on tape is a good choice for a good half hour or more a day, and your formerly autistic kid will be miraculously healed. This just makes me so mad because this is literally not how any of this works. Please do not think that any of these things are going to suddenly miraculously transform and heal your child. While none of this stuff can hurt and likely help, it's not the real answer. It's not the full answer. Get an appropriate level of help from proven and time-tested professionals if you have an autistic child. Debbie is not a professional. Debbie does not even give us a clue what happened to her poor little foster baby with the tiny skull, Peanut. It's frightening to think that a foster care agency thought that the Pearls would be an appropriate foster care family and home. I find that hard to believe, very hard to believe. Debbie started the next chapter with some very normal descriptions of brain parts and their various functions. It's not entirely made up for a change. Yeah, Debbie's science is here for a change. Debbie explains that the prefrontal cortex and your teenager is underdeveloped and will not stop developing until he is around 25 years old of age. Keep in mind that the Pearls also pushed for young marriage at like 17, 18 years old. And Debbie herself was still a teenager with that underdeveloped prefrontal cortex when she married Michael. Explains a lot to me. Debbie quote, "These half-brain teenagers are with full-grown bodies and overgrown sex drives also have loads of neurotransmitters screaming their self-importance." Anyone that's ever raised a teenager, a normal teenager, not cowed and beaten in a cult, can testify to that fact. When raising teens, it is so important to realize that they don't know it all while thinking they know it all. And to take everything they say involving this with a boulder of salt. Try not to laugh and don't take offense. It's just easier and for you and for them. And it gives them, the freedom to say whatever is on their mind. I've raised teenagers. I can testify to this truth. Okay, another Debbie Pearl quote. "It is scary now to know I was a half-brain dimwit, riding a horse named Know-It-All to a battle against forces of ignorance and complacency. The ranks of all revolutions are filled with people under the age of 25. Yep, that part is true. Youngsters make good cannon fodder in wars. It's wrong. I'm opposed to very young people being in the military too for those reasons. Yes, again, Debbie was married to Mike by the time she was 18. So that's about 7 years of rushing around with immaturity, raising her children. She started having babies quickly too. Too bad she's still stuck intellectually and emotionally in that same place, like a lot of people who were abused. Debbie goes so far as to say you should get your teenager to repeat every single morning this affirmation. And I'm trying not to laugh here. I'm trying because it's just really difficult with this stuff. As a young adult under the age of 25, I do not have complete prefrontal cortex, which means I might be inclined to make poor decisions, exercise poor judgment, misunderstand someone or something, or just don't know for sure if I am right about something. I am really very stupid. I must listen to my parents and those in authority even more than when I was 4 years old, if I hope to come through in good form and without regrets." And I'm rolling my eyes here. Stupid? I cannot believe she would willingly have anyone call themselves that word. Talk about a self-esteem wrecking and destroying, creating a laundry list of insecurities that would be enough to buy a psychiatrist that second vacation home if they had to unpick this in therapy. Please do not talk to your children this way. Not even when they are actually being dumb and you're sitting there going, really? Really? That's where you decided to go with this crap? Debbie goes on to state that if you're having trouble with your child by the age of 15 years old, you will lose him to his own ship of ideas and ship of fools. Again, not true. Our own biology sets us up at that age to start loosening the parental-child bonds in preparation for that day when those same children walk out of the door to take up their lives as independent adults, by golly. It's helpful to keep that in mind when dealing with teenagers. And to try to remember to play out that line, to give them increasing responsibilities as they chafe at your restrictions and test the boundaries. Talk to your children heart to heart and figure out a way both of you can work together and manage to live together without rubbing each other the wrong way, because it does happen. Then Debbie moved on to tales of MRIs, adults and young adults' brains, and claiming that youngsters almost always misunderstand other people and their emotions towards them. She does not say it, but part of me wonders if this was not a sneaky way to shut kids down from telling their parents about abuse. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse at the hands of others. I really wonder about that when she says that. Debbie jumps to drunk driving and drugs, pointing out that this is a time that this stuff is likely to happen. Debbie tells the dumbest tale of her, quote, Johnny Angel, a kid she knew as a teenager fooling around with the wrong girl, wrapping his old junker around a tree. Sounds like a bad song from the 1950s, does it not? Or the 60s. Johnny Angel. One page is all she spares for the driving engine that is teen sexual development, and it is described as hormones. Her own advice is this, quote, the key is to fill his life with challenging opportunities, things that will burn hormones in constructive pursuits. In Debbie's idiotic world in imaginary 1950s, girls do not struggle with raging pants parts. In the real world we live in, we know that this is simply not true. Girls can struggle with the same temptations and lusts as boys. Debbie wastes a further 5 or 6 pages claiming the only way to deal with teenagers is to keep them so incredibly busy they don't have the time or the inclination to rebel or do the sin pants dance. Mission trips and building stuff is her solution, her big solution for all of this. Debbie says you must use your brain or you will lose it. True. Citing people like Charles Darwin, saying that the Aborigines of Australia were lesser people, and others saying that black slaves of America weren't smart either. Debbie explains that's only because they never had the opportunities to use, develop, and exercise their brains. How very progressive of Debbie. Without mentioning that not only that, they had to figure out how to keep from being beaten and abused by the white people that owned them, and that they did not have educational opportunities. There's just so much is just missing from this statement that she made. And stand by for some more TV bashing. She hates television. Quote, other things equal a life filled with more complex flow activities is more worth living than one spent consuming passive entertainment. Now, she did not come up with this quote. She quoted the quote, but it was by Mihaly S.E., and I don't know the rest of it. Let me spell you the last name because I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this. Eskiszentmichalyl. I'm going to guess he's some kind of Russian researcher, would be my guess. So far we've had Debbie quote a liberal Kennedy. We've had her quote what seems like a Russian researcher who would have been likely doing his research back in the old Soviet days of the USSR. We've had her quote a number of people, like Darwin, that she has no belief in what they preach. So she likes to just cherry pick quotes by people she does not agree with at all. What about a life spent ordering others to beat their children when not beating your own? What does that lead to? Debbie rambles on about the Renaissance, the blue bloods, and commoners. Actually, the word aristocracy would fit better than blue bloods. She explains those of high birth were exposed to the finest knowledge and enough high quality fats that their brains developed, while the hapless serfs stayed dumb and malnourished. Debbie rattles on and on about her blue bloods, even to mistaking. Where are we? This jumped suddenly when I was trying to roll this. Even mistakenly claiming things like they were all highly trained in animal husbandry. It's the most bizarre misinformation and worship of a class of folks I've seen since college. She tries to figure out what else makes blue blood so special. She repeats her falsehood about Paul Bach-Irita and his father's brainstem mentioned way back in chapter 1. Big lie number 1 coming up. I've got a Debbie quote that's a big lie. No one knew that the brain could change for the worse under the influence of negative attitudes, unthankfulness, bitterness. That's the evangelical boogeyman. And just general moodiness. With stinking thinking, the brain produces chemicals like cortisol that diminish mental and emotional capacity. This is such a breathtaking and astounding lie. I almost don't even know where to start with this. You are not your emotions. Your emotions aren't evil. They don't cause anything but how you feel. How you feel does not indicate your brain power or is indicative of anything more than how you feel in that moment. Example. I got weepy a couple days before I read this chapter of the book, and I was sad for no reason whatsoever. My life was going well. There was nothing to make me sad going on or anxious or nervous or anything. I took my blood pressure. I took my blood sugar reading. I took my oxygen level reading. The pressure and the sugar levels were way too low and my oxygen had tanked. I ate something. I started taking my asthma meds and lay down for a half hour, rising to feel completely differently. My attitude had changed. Learning to recognize that my body needs impact my moods was an important part of the puzzle of learning self-care that I needed to learn after leaving my old CULT church. It's not stinking thinking that's driving our moods. Most of our moods, it can be tragedies or fatigue or some unmet need of our bodies, illness, hormone imbalances, the still unmapped chemistries of our brains. Where is that bitterness and all of that? It does not exist at all. Okay, I'm seeing Debbie is telling big lies here. I am trying to debunk them. I think I'm going to get through the next one and then I'm going to wrap it up because this has been going on a long while. Big lie number 2. The prefrontal cortex, and it's stupid, my physical therapist wants me to talk like this. The most advanced brain region is also the most sensitive to the detrimental effects of stress exposure. Even quite mild, acute, uncontrollable stress can cause a rapid and dramatic loss Lord of mercy. As people like to say, photos or it did not happen. Debi cites no studies or scientists in her claims about stress destroying prefrontal cortex tissue. Stress does have a negative effect on your brain. But if this was true, Debi Pearl would likely be brain dead from the levels of stress Michael has put her through during their marriage, from abusing her on the honeymoon, through abusing her car, starving the family, refusing to hold a real job, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And what the heck is even mild, acute, uncontrollable stress? Either it's mild or it's not. It can't be both at the same time. Stress can shrink your prefrontal cortex, I discovered after doing some research. But there's no evidence of some mass extinction level brain cell die-off like Debi Pearl claims. And it just kind of blows my mind because yesterday I had one of those extreme acute stress moments. We bought a new car just over 15 months ago, okay? And we have to take it in every now and then to the dealership, get the oil changed, tires rotated, whatever they do to keep your car in good shape after you buy it, okay? We had to get maintenance. So we drove the car in for maintenance. There's a bridge out, so we have to do a detour around. So it's about an hour to our trip. So I was already kind of stressed out. Then we ran through PriceSmart and got everything we would need for 6 weeks or so, like we try to do every time we go. With PriceSmart is a Costco sort of thing. It is Costco here. You can buy Kirkland brand products. So we did that, and I started back, and the heavens opened. It started raining so hard that the roads started getting flooded out. I had to drive through a lot of flood water. I was not happy about that. So we finally got within about 2 to 3 miles of our house. And there's a major intersection where the major road between Santa Cruz and Wacas is, and then the road that turned to Tamarindo T-bones into it. Got a mile from that intersection, and traffic was stopped. And I was observing people going up and around and different things, and there is a back road. So we crawled forward for about 30 minutes, and finally I started talking to a Tico guy. Started saying there was an accident at the intersection. The entire intersection was shut down. We have to go through there. There aren't a lot of places for us to cross to go around. There's right there in Villarreal where we were. There's all these other places. So I elected to go take the back road that I know. So I went to do that, and it was so crowded I couldn't get my car in the back road. So Tico's, Costa Rica's finest natural resource, is their people. These guys in a work van was like, follow me, they waved. And so I followed them on a bumpy, pitted road all the way around. So I got to the very end of the back road that I knew. There was only one problem. Well, actually 2 or 3. Because of the rains, the creek that you have to ford was high. Number 1. Number 2, there we were going and coming in both directions. And the road is crumbled, so there's only really room for one new traffic. So I'm trying to go up and around over where the gravel is built up where I can cross. So I crossed just fine, but then I had to zoom out of the way to get to the road, and I'm got the left-hand tires on the gravel of the bank, and my right-hand tires were in the deepest parts of the water. And there was nothing under my right tires. So I was driving, hanging off. So I was having a lot of stress as a result of all of this. And I did finally get up to the main road and get to my house. But I had a few minutes there. And Debi Pearl, you cannot tell me that I fried brain cells doing that, because I did not. Now, did my eyes dilate? Did my heart pound? I'm sure. I'm sure my blood pressure even went up then. But I handled it like a champ, like a boss, like a badass. And Debi Pearl seems to think that those are the things that will kill your brain. No, they build character when you go through things. I am sorry. So then she claims that people who are awesome musicians, scientists, or anything else superb in their fields, but they're seriously lacking in other areas, are the real idiots. She actually said that word. That's a full life that only comes from balance. It's such a strange segue straight out of stress. And then she starts babbling about brain grooving it again, doing the same thing over and over again until it becomes embedded in our brain. How we lose brain cells as we age, which is true, and the importance in a lifetime learning, and that's it. I'm going to cut it up there because Debbie is just killing my brain that I have so much going on right now. The minor event was yesterday's crazy travels. Hey, my little car almost floats. I could have floated down the river, I guess. So thank you for joining me. And I was going to talk about the whole situation with Steve McRae and KJ because she's trying to claim a bunch of things about him. None of them are true. He's not the head of some criminal organization trying to call CPS on her and her kids. He's not doing that at all. And anything she tries to pin on him, she's tried to pin on Nat and a pile of other people. There's nobody swatting her. There's nobody calling CPS that I know of. Nobody but like I said, I've taken such a step back from this that I'm just going to say Steve did her nothing. Steve helped her. Steve allowed her on his YouTube channel. He allowed her to take part in the Smoking Nun. He launched that hydra-headed monster that is her now. So if I fault Steve for anything, it's that he launched her. But he, like me, had no idea what he was dealing with. So there you go. Now you know. So anything she says about Steve is suspect. Just treat it with a boulder of salt, like I said. Love you guys. Thank you for watching. I tried to do this as a live stream, but YouTube was just not cooperating with me today. So it is what it is. We're going to pick up next week. I only got through 5 pages of my notes. 5 pages today. Can you believe that? 5 or 6 pages. And it took all that time. That's how many bad ideas. And I never even got to the part where she was talking about giving your kids MMS because she approves of that too. So don't do that. Don't give your kids weird supplements. Don't spank them thinking that you're going to make them grow brain cells. Everything about Debbie's advice is just bad. I'll see you next week for sure on this one. And I'll see you in a few days with the Righteous Gemstones.